Okay, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, we're 4 entries into this one. Does the series even need an introduction? Well, actually, given the viewership of some of these videos, yeah, I probably should. In that case, for those of you who are new here, howdy, I'm Prakuza, and welcome to DevBox, where today we're using the medium of the Soulsborne series to tackle the question of which fighter is the true master of deceptive, cutthroat combat. So far, the ninja has taken quite a steady lead against the pirate as we enter our 4th game in this competition. However, with my favorite historical weapon of all time and the closest we'll ever get to a true cutlass on board here, Demon Souls might be exactly the edge that our seafaring swashbuckler needs. In that case, let's crest that hill and get into the 4th edition of our Generational Grudgematch. As we start, we can skip the tutorial, gotta love the remake's quality of life sometimes. For our resident ninja, once again we'll be taking Hattori Hanzo into the lands of Boletaria. This time, we start as the thief, more for the stealthy drip than anything else, give ourselves appropriately themed hair for a ninja, and finally take the firebomb as our starting gift. We'll go over that in a bit more detail when we get to the boss, but for now, the important thing to remember is that we don't really have much in the way of weapons to start with. Except of course for a bow, which has very limited ammo at the moment. Now, as we proceed through Area 1-1 of Boletaria Castle, there is a merchant from whom we can purchase items like firebombs and throwing knives. Eventually, we'll even get one that's entirely fitting for a ninja. However, none of these are a proper weapon class for this type of fighter. When we do manage to reach the boss, the Phalanx isn't exactly vulnerable to the bow, nor is he even all that manageable once we start throwing firebombs. His tendency to heal throughout the fight especially makes this a whole hassle, to the point that we need to reset more than once in order to actually get this fight done with what limited resources we have available right at the outset. Still, we persist and we get to make proper use of the Hirokudama, the Japanese firebombs. While the Demon Souls version of the firebomb isn't quite as obviously based on these ancient ninja weapons built from gunpowder packed into clay pots, the remake's version is at least somewhat more in line with the historical items. Getting through the fight takes quite a bit of greed, and the little hoplites on the side give us plenty of trouble, but nothing is so out of left field that we can't handle it. A rocky first encounter, but not too unimaginable of a win. As for our pirate, we'll once again be following Cervantes, and this time we're starting as a wanderer. Nice, it's like we're back in DS1 again. This gives us the falchion, a legitimate precursor to the cutlass. Many contemporary sources track the evolution of the cutlass back to the falchion from the 13th century, which waned in popularity around the 16th century, as the cutlass, also known as the hanger sword, would come into vogue during the Age of Sail, most specifically around the 17th century. In that case, there's still a certain amount of evolution to be found between the falchion and the cutlass, namely with the smaller size and the addition of an encasing guard, like either a cupped guard or simply a knuckle bow. As we start off 1-1, we'll also get to use firebombs, and we'll eventually find a light crossbow to stand in as our flintlock pistol. Still sad that we haven't had a real pistol since back in Bloodborne, but we continue. Regardless, we get to Phalanx again, and a combination of the firebombs and an actual weapon with the falchion makes quick work of the boss. Really not much to speak on here. I mean, the pirate gets to use a sword in the sword game. He also gets firebombs, throwing knives, a crossbow, and eventually a regular bow too. So yeah, Cervantes gets the obvious advantage here. Anyway, point pirate, give it some time for Hanzo to get a real weapon before we can start actually competing. Alright, time for us to head to the Shrine of Storms in order to pick up our first real weapon, the Uchi-katana. Now, in previous installments of this series, I've been rather adamant about not giving the ninja a proper katana, and that has mostly come down to attempting to dissuade the image of the ninjato, a ninja-specific choice for sword to bring into battle and castle sieges. The specifics of this sword are the lack of a curve, which made it a better thrusting weapon as opposed to the cutting specialty of the classic Uchi-katana. This would supposedly make the ninjato much more deadly, as thrusts deal elevated internal damage to targets, while cuts could be slightly more superficial and often ended fights by making it impossible for an opponent to continue the fight, rather than killing them outright. Additionally, the classic ninjato has a squared tsuba rather than a rounded one. This would often have additional utility, such as allowing ninja to climb on them in order to scale high walls and castle fortifications. Now, while these benefits feel relatively salient for a stealth assassin to take into combat, there is a lot of doubt about the historical accuracy of the ninjato ever existing. For one, there are no surviving ninjato from the actual age of ninja, roughly between the 8th and 19th century, although it would be much more accurate to limit that time between the 14th and 19th century, to be honest. Also, the ninjato is never mentioned by name in any ninja text, only in text written about ninja. Normally in the form of fiction, usually created to be performed on stage. One interesting note about the ninjato's improved martial benefits, however, is that this type of sword did become popular among early police in the Edo period. Specifically, it was the straightened blade, as needing the cutting power of the curved Uchi-katana wouldn't be as necessary in civilian settings where opponents wouldn't be likely to wear armor that needed that extra benefit of the classic design. Anyway, we'll be picking up an Uchi-katana now, since ninja would absolutely use katanas of various kinds throughout history. The most specific limiting factor that I would prefer to stick to for a ninja is the need for a concealable weapon in a lot of cases, but it isn't honestly that uncommon for any type of ninja to have taken any kind of katana around into battle. Hell, there are plenty of techniques that call directly into using a yari, so yeah, Uchi-katana it is. Oh, and while we're here, we can kill Vanguard to celebrate finally getting a real weapon. I honestly cannot explain how much I fucking struggle to make it up to the killage. For one, what is going on with the falchion against the damn skeletons here? We're honestly better off bare-fisted. Like, legitimately. We're better off without a weapon than we are with the weapon that slaughtered Phalanx like 5 minutes ago. What the hell? Okay, after very much stress, we finally get the killage. Now, is the killage really the best weapon to emulate a cutlass? No, not really. For one, this thing is pretty long in comparison to our preferred weapon type, and it likewise doesn't have the right kind of handguard that I'd want for a one-handed close-quarters saber. However, for a little bit of Prakuza lore, the killage is actually my favorite historical weapon that actually saw use in warfare. There are a lot of caveats there, mostly because I like a lot of fantasy and mythical weapons as well, like the Moonlight Greatsword from this very series. Then there's the Seven Branch Sword, which I would generally call my favorite historical sword, but it most certainly was never a weapon, nor did it see any real combat. Instead, this was a mostly ceremonial weapon, gifted from a Korean ruler to a Japanese emperor, or possibly an empress, though the actual history of the weapon has been lost to time, unfortunately. Still, as far as actual weapons that actually saw use in any kind of real combat, the killage is the top dog. It's a Turkish cavalry saber with a wicked curve that allowed it to absolutely rip through opponents while the wielder rode by on horseback. It's most notable for its extra notch of metal at the tip, which centers the weight away from the hilt, giving the weapon more cutting power, while also sacrificing a not insignificant amount of control over each swing. Okay, now that we've finally got a weapon, we can go immediately fail at fighting Vanguard, and give up trying to kill him. This whole segment has absolutely sucked for the pirate, but hey, at least I finally get to play one of these games with my favorite sword. Normally, I wouldn't even bother giving this section a score, but I have no idea what the hell happened trying to get the damn killage for Cervantes. Somehow, Hanzo actually had a massive advantage getting through the Shrine of Storms in the beginning. Not in spite of having no weapon to use, but because he didn't have a damn weapon to use. Point Ninja, somehow. Okay, let's test out the Uchi-katana for real. And by that, I of course mean by quickly running through Area 1-2 and fighting the Tower Knight. This is a great time to point out that most bosses in Demon Souls are gimmick fights, in one way or another. And in comparison to every other game in the series, they are pretty damn easy. So most of these fights are going to come down to straight DPS or some type of quirk of the two builds that fits directly into fighting these specific bosses. In that case, the main points about the Tower Knight come down to the archers at the top and trying to get the boss finished with as few cycles of kicking his heels as possible. With our trusty Uchigatana in hand, we're able to cut down each archer in one strike. But it takes a total of 2 cycles in order to keep the Tower Knight down for good. Not a bad amount of DPS to be honest, and with a bow on my back, I could have gone for the range strat against this guy, but honestly, if you know what you're doing, the ankle method is usually faster anyway. And it would take some really sloppy play to actually die here. Alright, so Cervantes has our Killage as his stand-in for the Cutlass in 1-2. It might not exactly be as accurate as the Falchion, but once again, this is one of my favorite weapon designs ever, so there was no way I wasn't going to give it a proper chance in this run. As for the boss, well, we die on our first attempt because of absolutely terrible timing on that heal. Does a hint 30 seconds in advance count as foreshadowing, or was that more of a setup punchline situation? On our winning run, we technically need 2 cycles to finish him off, since Tower Knight is being weird about staying by the stairs, and I missed the opportunity to get any damage off on his head on that first cycle. However, in practical experience, I might be willing to call that 1 cycle. The boss has taken a little bit of extra damage thanks to having to bite at his ankles a little more before actually giving his head the smackdown, but I don't know if that is really what made the difference here. Honestly, it looks like the Killage straight up has the DPS here to actually smack the boy down in 1, especially if I maximize my stamina use and don't swing completely willy-nilly. If this was on execution, it would be to Hattori, hands down. That was a much cleaner fight, no deaths, and much less damage taken in the phases between damage cycles. However, this competition is on the actual builds, not my own fumbling to use them properly. In that case, once Tower Knight was on the ground, the Killage had the better DPS, to the point that Cervantes only needed 1 actual damage cycle to get the win. So, point Pirate. Even if my poor execution doesn't do the better build the justice it deserves in this fight. Our next boss is Armored Spider in 2-1. However, while we're here, I really need to talk about the utility of the Uchigatana and its moveset. Specifically, I want to look at the one-handed R2, which is a forward thrust. This means that while the Uchigatana is primarily a slashing weapon, this one attack does do piercing damage, which means extra damage to the miners throughout the area. That combined with the arrows, which also do piercing damage from the bow, means we've got plenty of ways to take out the thick-skinned enemies in 2-1 who normally cause a lot of problems for slashing weapon specific builds. As for the Armored Spider, avoid the range attacks, dodge roll the cross swipe, then attack, stand in the center for the smash, then attack again, run back when the spider spits fire all over the ground, rinse, repeat, heal when needed, and eventually get the kill. A perfectly clean fight. Cervantes doesn't get to bring many advantages into 2-1 at the moment, since I still haven't gotten a permanent bow for the build, but the crossbow at least partially manages to make up for the Killage's rough performance against the miners. So getting to the Armored Spider isn't exactly the most pleasant trip, but it's far from impossible. Once we're here though, the gimmick is pretty simple, even if I do miss a dodge or two when trying to avoid the web shot, which leads to a whole cavalcade of problems if I let that get out of hand. But a fistful of grass is more than enough to recover from that little problem. After that, it's a matter of the Killage's DPS against a boss that doesn't seem to have as thick of skin as the enemies leading up to it. Given that so many of these bosses are gimmick bosses, these are going to be a lot of close calls. And we're probably going to get a handful of ties, at least on the first couple bosses. In the case of the Armored Spider, this one is close, but we do actually have a definitive winner. Even with Cervantes getting caught in the web, the DPS of the Killage does manage to outperform the Uchigatana. It really comes down to the stamina cost of each attack between each weapon. While both builds have roughly the same amount of overall stamina and the Uchigatana deals more damage per swing, the Killage is able to get off 1 extra strike before needing to stop and recover our energy. The edge is small, but it does put raw DPS fights in the Killage's favor at the moment. Point Pirate, another great showcase for my favorite historical weapon that actually saw use in combat. Still, way too many caveats, but I like the Killage. Favorite Saber for sure, that one's easier. Slight aside before we get back to the fights, we took a little intermission here on both runs to head to 2-2, not to actually fight Flamelurker because he'll blast us to death at this point in the game, but instead to recruit Patches to come back to the Nexus with us. Since he sells heavy arrows and bolts, he's pretty useful for both of these builds, even if the crossbow is such actual garbage in this game that I barely use it for Cervantes. There's a rant coming for that thing, but it'll wait for now. Patches also sells most types of grass at the lowest price of any merchant, and his stock will update at certain points in the game. Additionally, while we jump into 2-2, we also find a longsword that we can use to show From Software's bias when it comes to the katanas in these games. This has been the case for the other games too, but it turns out that From Software actually gets the relative lengths of longswords and katanas wrong. Because as we can see, the longsword is significantly shorter than the Uchigatana. Like, significantly. However, this shouldn't be the case, because traditionally the Uchigatana's average blade length was roughly between 26 and 31 inches, while a longsword would have traditionally been between 31 and 43 inches, making a relatively long Uchigatana equivalent to a relatively short longsword. While I can't exactly measure the length of this here without a real-world analog to compare it to, we're either looking at an undersized longsword and therefore likely something closer to a bastard sword, as this would be somewhere between a longsword and an arming sword, which is a one-handed weapon more in line with the Viking sword or gladius in size. Except the bastard sword also exists in Demon Souls, in every Souls game actually, and it is always depicted as longer than the longsword. So yeah, From Software's naming conventions for European swords is actually pretty off. Granted, considering that they still use scimitar to describe a shamshir, I shouldn't be too surprised. Not everyone can be Dark Cloud, getting these sword names right all the way back in the year 2000. That's level 5 for you. The developer always knocks it out of the park. Hey, what are they up to now? Oh. That's depressing. Alright, but intermission over, let's get back to the competition, which thankfully isn't about length measurements, because in this case the developer's bias is showing. Would it surprise anyone who's played this game that Tower of Latria is a total pain for the ninja? Because it's a total pain for fucking everybody. Even with the Thief's Ring on to help us sneak around, the tight hallways and patrolling mine flares means that there's really no way to get through without fighting everything in our path. Which is honestly the case for pretty much all of Demon Souls. Definitely fits with RPGs of the time, but this is a divergence in future titles that I really prefer. Running being an option at all, even if not always a great option, makes future FromSoft games much more manageable. Still, Tower of Latria really showcases the need to carefully engage with every single enemy, as any of them can easily wipe us out. While we're here, we also pick up the Imperial Spy outfit, which fits pretty well for the ninja look, especially considering the history of the Japanese Empire and the nobility's use of ninja as spies. As for the Fool's Idol herself, the fight mostly goes fine because I'm coming in with a decent amount of healing items. Not a ton, but definitely a lot by Souls-like standards, thanks to how much grass Demon Souls lets us bring into fights. Would you look at that? Cervantes also struggles getting through the Tower of Latria. It's almost like the Mind Flayers are incredibly unfair, unfun, and honestly should be retired as an enemy concept. Looking at you, Bloodborne. But as much as some of these enemies suck, the Killage does its job to get us through without much trouble. We even get to talk to this simp praying at the altar of his Oshi, who straight up lies to us and says he won't be a problem in the coming fight. I don't exactly remember what he does if we do let him live, but I'm still not doing that. We also changed our outfit at this point to the official's outfit, which at least partially fits the bill for the pirate look. I mean, it's as close as we're going to get in Demon Souls, especially if we go by some of the old artworks of Blackbeard, which, yeah, that is not the intimidating pirate lord I usually imagine. This one is tough to tell if it's a matter of performance or the actual strength of the builds, because I got run around hard as Cervantes, in ways that did not happen for Hanzo. To be honest, the entire pirate playthrough had overall much worse luck than his ninja counterpart. Still, with a win more than a minute faster on the Fool's Idol, this one has got to be a point for Ninja. He absolutely chewed this fight up in ways that the pirate simply couldn't keep up with. Alright, we've mostly been through Shrine of Storms already, but without a blunt weapon, we're really struggling here thanks to the defenses on the skeletons. That being said, we've upgraded our weapons a lot, with the Uchigatana reaching +7 before arriving here. So the high slash resistance isn't that big of a deal, at least not against the normal silver skeletons. Then, of course, we get the actual fight against the Adjudicator, which is arguably one of the easiest fights in the game. I'm not even sure if I know how to get hit by that big swing at this point. And then after 2 damage cycles, we're through without any more trouble. Now that we're back in the shrine, Cervantes can get some good old vengeance on Vanguard. Hell yeah! Take that for losing the pirate that point from earlier. As for the actual boss, once again, the Adjudicator is really no problem for any build that can, roll. And with the killage in hand, we even managed to take him down in 1 cycle. Hot damn. Ideally, this could be a level that evens itself out because Hanzo beat Vanguard really early on. However, that point was already accounted for. So yeah, with a single cycle to take out Adjudicator, this is pretty easily a point to pirate. I really didn't notice the improved DPS in my actual playthrough before watching back the footage, but yeah, that Saber of Cervantes is more like a killin' it-age. I'm not sorry about that one. We're hop, skip, and jumping right to the boss fight here because the Uchigatana makes short work of the enemies in the Valley of Defilement. As we jump into the Leechmonger fight, yeah, that continues to be the case because this dude cannot stand up to the might of the Uchigatana. Once again, RNG is really on Hanzo's side here as the boss barely throws out any attacks. Likewise, the katana is fully capable of bursting through the healing phase and overpowering that regen without losing too much time as the boss tries to power through our attacks. Fun fact, while I've been consistently killing myself in-game in the Nexus for both of these runs at this point, I decided I wanted to start dying in the Valley of Defilement, because for once, I actually want to drop the world tendency into black. And in fact, we're looking to hit pure black tendency, specifically. That's why you're seeing my health at full for once here, since not only does it not matter if I die prematurely as I head for the boss, I was actually counting on it. So consider that when you see how quickly Cervantes wipes the floor with the Leechmonger, because this was supposed to be a kamikaze run, although maybe that would have been more fitting for Hanzo. Well, regardless, we get the kill without the boss ever even trying to heal, which was actually worse RNG in this case, since he does thrash me enough to get me a bit nervous about dying. Listen, I may have been looking to die at some point, but I wasn't necessarily looking forward to the idea of having to repeat the run back to get here. The difference in these kills is really only a matter of seconds, to be completely honest. Really not enough to fully call it in one direction or the other, considering that RNG extended both fights in different ways. I could see an argument when putting these two fights next to each other that maybe the killage is a more versatile weapon in this fight, and that the stamina cost is still keeping Cervantes' DPS a little bit higher, and therefore the build is more successful on his end. That being said, it's really too close to call since the Uchigatana does enough extra damage per hit to even out some of that stamina drain. So in this case, point to both, with our first tied fight of the run. Took all the way to the end of the first visits to get there, but we finally evened out. Time to change weapons. So, who's next for us to fight? Hopefully it's a boss with fun, clear telegraphs and doesn't constantly double hit us to death with explosive smashes that I swear I fucking dodged. Yeah, it's Flamelurker. I know this is the most Dark Souls boss in Demon Souls without being consumed by a gimmick, which in turn makes it an actual fight, even in subsequent runs after having figured out the correct way to play. But is this really anyone's favorite boss? Because I can easily say he's my least favorite. Considering some of these random hits we take while he jumps around the arena, I can really understand why most people cheese him. No judgment for anyone who had to get him stuck on dragon bones to get through this fight. So we'll get to the boss eventually, but for now, we actually need to go collect some new weapons for Cervantes. 2 in specific. For one, we'll be grabbing the longbow that we passed in Shrine of Storms, up here with the Skeleton Archer. I've already explained in the DS2 video why pirates should be allowed to use bows, thanks to several reports of Sir Francis Drake making use of the bow during his time as a privateer. Although I will say, it is tough to consider if Drake should count as a pirate. I mean, I understand that the Queen called him my pirate during his years of service, but he was a devout man of the British Royal Navy to the end. Doesn't exactly hit that adventurous spirit of working outside the law that generally comes with the true golden age of piracy, with men like Blackbeard, William Kidd, and Henry Morgan. Not that the actual golden age of piracy was anything but a bunch of cutthroat murderers slaughtering hardworking seamen for a modest profit, and in most cases an early grave for themselves anyway. Still, we'll take this excuse to take our bow to the Valley of Defilement, as we need to continue to throw ourselves from the cliffs until the world drops into pure black tendency. This will spawn a certain NPC Black Phantom in 5-2, which will kill us. Like a lot. And the run back every time is pretty gnarly. Why am I doing this again? Oh, right, a proper cutlass. Well, after spending a few hours attempting to get even a single hit on Selen, yes, that's her name, yes, FromSoft reused it in Elden Ring, no, she's not a mage in this one, I finally get a strat that works on her for some reason. So it turns out that since the killage can inflict bleed, if I hit her a few times with my two-hand combo, it'll inflict the status on her, and her AI will endlessly loop to try removing the bleed effect. However, the spell to remove it has a very long windup, which I can use to wail on her, interrupting her attempts to cure herself. So then she tries to heal again, at which point I wail on her again. Keep this up for about 5 actual minutes, and we can finally get our kill and claim our reward. Blind. It's a rather unassuming curved sword with a transparent blade that might honestly be better in Hanzo's hands rather than Cervantes, but the unique shape of this weapon puts it in a specific classification of sword. This shape of guard, built directly out of the tang and coming back up to meet the bottom edge of the blade, makes it a type of Dusak, though some say Dusuk, which is the first time in the series so far that we've found a legitimate cutlass. Yeah, the Dusak is actually a type of cutlass, if we're considering cutlass to mean a more general classification of short, broad saber with a handguard, which traditionally this is what the term generally means. And while not every Dusak used this style of guard forged directly out of the tang, it was prevalent enough to find its way into manuals like those of Joachim Myers, a name that you'll have certainly heard if you spend any amount of time on SwordTube, since his manuals are one of the premier guides for historical European sword combat. With this weapon in hand though, how does it work against the Flamelurker? Well, yeah, this doesn't really go well for a while, and the new weapon is really only part of the problem. Another part is my attempts to use my new offhand weapon. See, I picked this dagger up back in Latria during the Fool's Idol fight, and I was very interested in seeing how powerful the plague buildup it could inflict might be. In this case, the problem is twofold, as first off, the dagger, the baby's nail, is extremely weak at base level. But second is the fact that Flamelurker has very high resistance to poison, plague, and bleed. So no matter how many times I swipe with this shitty little dagger, I'm never getting a plague me off on him. So naturally, the fight does go a lot better once I lock in and start putting the blind to proper use. Although, right away, I'm already noticing that this weapon is a considerable downgrade from my original killage. While blind's dexterity scaling far outclasses most other curved swords, or most other weapons in general, its base damage is remarkably low, and to top it off, this is one of many weapons that upgrades with colorless demon souls, an extremely rare material that can only be applied to the specific weapons that use it after giving Ed the searing demon's soul. You know, the soul we'll get from Flamelurker. So we're at a +0 blind against the most difficult boss before the Old King. Needless to say, this is not a good time, and it wasn't even a good time getting the weapon in the first place. When are the good times supposed to come back? Always sucks to not give the point to a brand new weapon, but everything was stacked against the blind at this point. An all-over downgrade from a weapon that was competing with the Adjudicator and actually winning in a lot of cases on speed, to a rather underwhelming weapon that is specifically hampered in this exact fight. Yeah, point to Ninja, and I'm not gonna lie, things aren't looking great for Pirate if I'm sticking with the blind from here on out. You know, I'd be hard-pressed to come up with a worse fight than DS1's Bed of Chaos, except maybe adding poorly implemented stealth mechanics to it, which is how we arrive to the Dragon God. Don't worry, FromSoft, you'll nail this design one day, or maybe you should go ahead and give up on it. No points, he doesn't deserve it. Well, now that we've killed our first Archdemon, we can head into 1-3 and fight the Penetrator. First, we need to go pick up the Hiltless, though. Demon Souls' very own version of the Chaos Blade, only without the humanity boost. Similar to Cervantes' Blind, the Hiltless also only levels through colorless Demon Souls. We need a total of 5 of these to hit max damage, but spoiler, neither the Ninja nor Pirate are going to hit +5 by the end of this run. We can get one of these upgrade materials pretty easily by taking a Talisman of God to the Trading Crow in the Shrine of Storms. The others will require killing primeval demons, which only spawn in worlds that are currently set to pure black tendency. Fortunately, we've got plenty of Stones of Ephemeral Eyes to return ourselves to body form, then endlessly throw ourselves off this cliff until we see something appear out in the distance from the initial spawn point of 2-1. That's the Primeval Demon, and while they aren't hard to kill, they only spawn once per world per playthrough. And they even have a chance to not even drop the colorless Demon Soul. Yeah, Demon Souls isn't exactly great about upgrade materials, and this might be the worst it gets. Good thing I've only got one weapon that needs them on each build. Oh, and while we're here demonetizing the video on repeat, we can also upgrade our bow to the Lava Bow. It's a bow, but lava! It actually changes every arrow into a fire arrow, and they're better fire arrows than the regular fire arrows. It would probably be best with the white arrows that we could buy from patches later, but Hanzo will never know they exist. As for the boss we're supposed to be after, we've got the Penetrator. And honestly, the level ahead of him, 1-3 of Boletaria Castle, is probably my favorite in the whole game. Honestly, 1-1 and 1-3 are among the best designed locales in Demon Souls, and having a solid close and long-ranged weapon to head through these areas with is a blast. Loving the Hiltless Lava Bow Wombo combo here. Okay, but we're here for the boss fights, and now we get to fight the Stabby Man. At this point, I'm curious if it was a matter of luck, the build having some real power behind it, or maybe a proper fear of death, since any amount of lost progress meant restarting a 15-minute fight, but my goodness, I feel like I did better back in the Claw run. You know, when I could barely even touch this guy? Still, on a quick reset, we get the kill, with the Hiltless proving to be a remarkably powerful katana, even if I'll never wind up hitting +5 by the end of the run. This guy really isn't that hard, but I certainly feel like I have a tendency to greed here, and the fact that it only takes 3 hits for me to lose my ability to dodge for a hot second makes getting punished for greed both very likely and deadly. So, our weapon update came much sooner for Cervantes, meaning all we need to upgrade here is picking up some of those colorless Demon Souls in order to hit +2 on the blind. That being said, a +2 blind still feels like a downgrade from the +7 killage we had earlier, even as we dump level after level into our decks, which should ideally be offsetting the change in weapons, thanks to blind's massive scaling bonus. Of course, once again, as we run into the fight with the Stabby Man, it isn't the damage that does us in. On a good day, I could no-hit this guy with a bare fist. This was not a good day, and a ton of sloppy play leaves me living on 1 HP in a dream multiple times, and flat out dying once. That being said, the blind really isn't doing me any favors here either, by extending this fight out long enough for my compounding mistakes to really start to matter. At the surface level, the Penetrator is a boss that really should wind up giving two evenly matched opponents double scores. However, the lack of damage on the blind and the increase on the hiltless is really starting to create a gap between Hanzo and Cervantes here, which isn't great considering that we've still got like 8 more bosses to go. Point to Ninja, thanks mostly to the poor showing on the side of the pirate. Here's hoping some extra dex levels can close the widening gap between the two. Alright, we've left the Flamelurker behind, so it must be all downhill from here. As in, things should be getting easier. The boss quality, on the other hand, should be rising. Well, yeah. Maneaters are pretty up there alongside Flamelurker for worst bosses in Demon Souls. Mostly because of how fucking jank they are. So often, I'll be duking it out with these guys, and they'll either jump into the air and jitter around like crazy, delaying the fight, or they'll hit me once and stun lock me into oblivion. Still, this build is decent about smashing them both up. The bow especially rocks in this fight. In fact, the bow has been kicking ass for all of 3-2, especially against the gargoyles that keep trying to fly around the narrow bridges throughout the area. As for the boss, while it's mechanically usually pretty rough, Hanzo's got exactly what he needs to not really struggle here. With Cervantes, this is the first time that the longbow has started to really come in handy. It's not the best bow we can have access to now, but we don't have the strength to use any of the other better bows. So we're kinda settling for the longbow at this point. That being said, we've started to upgrade it through the spider path, which helps it match up with the blind superior dex scaling in fact. The result of these two weapons and some pretty high dex is a build that is quite the powerhouse that can chew up most enemies in 3-2 with a nice level of finesse. All except for the damn crossbow, that is. And you know what? It's crossbow rant time. Let's talk about this piece of shit. Now, crossbows are rarely very good in any Souls game because they tend to be extremely slow, deal less damage than the bow, and not scale with any stats. Although, as we found out in DS1, they can negatively scale if we don't have the required stats to wield them. However, for some reason, in Demon Souls, they are actually the worst they have ever been in any game. Because not only do they not scale, they also cannot be upgraded. At all. No hard stones, no sharp stones, not even a spider stone upgrade. What you see is what you get, and that's all it will ever be. So no matter how far we progress the build, the only thing that will ever improve this useless weapon is getting better bolts. 3 guesses for whether or not the best bolts even make a tangible difference. If you guessed anything but no, then you had more faith in From Software than a lightning spear hurling paladin. A travesty to a weapon that saw centuries of use arming turrets to defend castles, equipping peasant armies with the power to topple invading cavalries, and slaying everything from outlaws to kings. Put some damn respect on the crossbow's name. It deserves so much better than this. As for the Maneaters, well, shitty jank is shitty. Not enough to cause us too much trouble or cause us too many resets. I mean, it causes a couple resets, but enough to make this a real pain in the ass after having already fought Flamelurker not too long ago. But I'd rather get to stuff where I have more positive notes to say, so let's kill these two and move on. Yeah, again, not too much great to say about this fight, but at least I can say that the bow really makes this fight a lot better. I mean, honestly, the bow makes a lot of these games a lot better. Really can't overstate how much archery has improved my playthroughs recently. A handful of bow-only runs have helped me to rediscover the variety these games offer. Anyway, point to Ninja, the lava bow was simply the superior bow in a fight where range is king. And now we've arrived to the old monk. The reason I keep opening this game in offline mode, because I don't want to have to deal with PvP. Well, as we've seen in places like our initial dive into 4-2 to pick up the hiltless, the katana class of weapons are a solid choice for a PvP fight, even if it's an AI-controlled NPC. It's also great in the hands of the AI-controlled NPC. Anyway, against the base version of the old monk's offline NPC, hitless goes burr. Because for some reason, FromSoft decided to give this guy a set of claws and some periodic homing soul masses. Not the best build for an archdemon, but most of these fights are pretty easy, so I guess that's par for the course. As we jump in to fight the old monk at Cervantes, the blind is the superior NPC weapon actually, and its gimmick allows us to attack directly through shields, so this should ideally be in our pirate's favor. Except, the old monk NPC doesn't use a shield, so the blind is on even ground with every other weapon. Awesome! The one time it should be advantageous, and it's relegated right back to might as well have used the killage status. Perhaps in another version of this challenge, I actually went online and had to test these builds against real players. Perhaps in that world, the other player actually put up a fight and made this even remotely closer. Perhaps somewhere there would have been someone who absolutely clobbered Hanzo and Cervantes until they were blue in the face. But that is not this world, and NPC Old Monk did not stand a chance to the power of the Hiltless, even if it did manage to hold out for more than a minute longer against the blind. Yeah, this is an easy point to ninja. I suppose this makes sense considering that the katana excels in one-on-one duels like this. Old Hero plus Thief Ring equals free win for the ninja. Old Hero plus Thief Ring equals free win for the pirate. Points for both. Old Hero is too free. Even if the DPS on the pirate was lower, it really doesn't matter. Any fight that a build can no-hit doesn't deserve to end in lost points. So, the lava bow goes surprisingly hard against the Storm King. It even manages to kill off the baby manta rays with one hit each. I was really expecting this to go a lot worse, I'm not gonna lie. Having never tried to do a non-Storm Ruler approach to this fight, it never occurred to me that any other ranged attacks would even scratch this guy. So, the regular-ass longbow goes surprisingly hard here. I mean, it is upgraded through the spider path, so it is doing a little better than it might if it was only going through the standard upgrade path. But still, I was hardly expecting it to wail on the Storm King or his little baby mantas like this. Honestly, I'd never really realized before that the Storm King can even be fought like this. Like, I'd heard that range could do it, but I wouldn't have guessed that a good bow was almost better than the Storm Ruler strat. Like, what the hell is this damage? Anyway, since the lava bow and spider upgraded bow can each one-shot the baby stingrays, we're calling this a point for both. I really can't express how much I've fallen in love with the bow over the last year of runs. Probably my favorite revelation since starting this channel, to be honest. In addition to the hiltless, we can also utilize some pine resin, aka turpentine from the original version of the game, because Dirty Colossus is super weak to it. We honestly could have been utilizing some stuff like this for a while, but it hasn't really been such a major benefit that I've felt that it was necessary up until now. Also, this fits as one of many fire-based ninja tools, the most prominent toolkit in a ninja arsenal. I mean it. In my most recent read-through annotating the Bunsen Shukai, I'm currently tagging, I shit you not, 100 pages that simply lists every way to prepare fire so as to burn down enemy castles and encampments. It's 2 full volumes dedicated to nothing more than how to use fire. The result is that we make quick work of this guy. Now, I can't say for sure if the blind can be enhanced with pine resin, but it really doesn't matter, because we were never going to deal very good DPS anyway. Actually, I looked it up because I can do that between playing and writing. Turns out, no, blind is not buffable, so even if I wanted to pull a William Turner and coat my blade in flaming oil, it won't work on this cutlass. Still, it's not like Dirty Colossus is hard enough to even give me a hard time regardless of how the damage might be. So, victory on account of the boss being a slow, lumbering brute rather than the build actually having anything really going for it since I picked up the blind. Yeah, there's no need to belabor this one too far, pretty clear point to ninja. The fire tools and the better weapon absolutely takes the cake here. 2 parries to wipe the floor with Garl, and that two-handed riposte is magical. The blind is not really made to parry. Instead, it is meant to blast through defenses with its ability to ignore shields, so the riposte really leaves a lot to be desired. On the other hand, Garl left for some reason, and I was able to safely shoot Estrella from a distance until she died instead of her knightly companion. Even got a trophy for getting the kill this way. Neat. I mean, come on, bro. Look at that backwards impale. The fucking disrespect. Cinema. Point, Ninja. It's not even a question. This final fight is certainly the most bossy of any of the Demon Souls boss fights. As in, learning the moveset and patiently outpositioning the attacks is the trick here, rather than some minor gimmick. However, the Hiltless is perfect for this type of fight because it's honestly a solid weapon that works in two hands without the addition of a shield. Lots of trading blows and needing to mitigate for the chip damage I'm dealing to myself, but nothing too drastic to make this a major hassle. Honestly, a fun final boss. Once again, the blind is best used against enemies with shields, as seen as we try to approach the Old King. However, against the boss himself, the weapon's gimmick is completely useless. The gimmick I can use, however, is the plague from the baby's nail in my offhand. Oh wait, Old King Allant is immune to plague. Guess we're going the normal way then, huh? In that case, this is a long war of attrition as the DPS of the blind continues to disappoint. Being completely honest, Old King Allant is kind of a treat after playing through the rest of the game. His moveset and aggression makes for a really high quality fight that could fit in well with bosses from the later From Software catalog, like Artorias or Pontiff Sullivan. Although if he were moved into either of those games, he might need some speed tuning to keep up with the faster player characters of even DS1, let alone DS3. So no matter which build this is, it's always fun to get a real proper fight out of the final real boss of the game. That all being said, this is easily a point for Ninja. It's the objectively better build between these two at this point. So true King Allant won't be giving any points because this isn't a real fight, which means we're on to the final scoring phase. In that case, it should come as no surprise at this point who the winner is, though let's still tally up those points. Coming in second place, we've got a total of 7 points for Cervantes. Not great, but there weren't a lot of points to give out in the first place, so I guess it could have been worse. But that does give the win here to Hanzo, as he finishes off his playthrough with 12 points, a 5-point lead over his competitor. Kind of a dominant lead there. Most of this came down to the swap from the Killage to the Blind for Cervantes. Honestly, if the pirate had held on to that first weapon, then he might have taken the win. However, the Killage was never a proper cutlass, and the Blind is actually the closest we'll ever really get to the pirate's go-to weapon in the entire FromSoft catalog. No, seriously, it never gets closer even as we head to the massive arsenal available in DS3 and Elden Ring. That being said, it shouldn't be ignored exactly how powerful the Uchigatana and eventually the Hiltless were. As the precursor to the Chaos Blade, the Hiltless really offered some heavy damage in exchange for chipping us a little with each hit. Altogether, this was a well-earned victory for Hanzo in Demon Souls, which keeps his heavy lead as he heads into our next game with a grand total of 60 points. Meanwhile, Cervantes is really falling behind with only 53 points across the series so far. Finally, for the games list, Hanzo also holds the lead with DS1, DS2, and now Demon Souls under his belt. Cervantes is going to need to really step it up in the final 2 rounds if he wants to earn wins to go alongside his Bloodborne victory to even tie it up across the series as a whole. Still, it's anyone's game on points, and who knows, the next 2 might be exactly what Cervantes needs to take this Cinderella story to the end. Hey, it's that time again. The end of the video where I invite folks to come check out the Patreon, link in the description, and make good on the rewards for those currently pledged. Patreon members get early access to new content and their names written in the credits at the end of videos. And those who pledge in the top tiers get their names read out, like our DevBox designers, Genghis Braun, and our DevBox developers, Azul. Thanks for your support, and thanks for watching.
So the world might be mended. Better the northern land of Boletaria.